Hey everyone, and welcome back to the One Thing podcast. We're here with Josh Yellin today, who co-founded Google's first startup accelerator and spearheaded its growth, reaching founders in 70 different countries. Here with us to talk about his new book, which he co-authored with Martin Gonzalez, The Bonfire Moment: How to Bring Your Team Together to Solve the Hardest Problems Startups Face. Welcome, Josh. We're excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Well, we're excited to learn more about this because I've built a business. Chris has built businesses. We've both been involved in a lot of startups, whether they're involved as team members or involved because we started them. And I think that this is such an important topic. You really dive into this book about, there's so many reasons that startups fail, and I don't feel like people talk enough about the biggest reason that startups fail, which is the people element. So I'd love to hear the sort of origin story of the book, how you came up with this. Was it from personal experience, bad or good? How did y'all get into writing this book?
Thank you. What a great question. I love talking about this, and so this goes back about 9 years actually. This project goes on. We've been working on the book for several years, but this project in earnest has been going on about 9 years. So it's been almost a decade of work here. And when we started Google Startup Accelerator, it was reaching out to startups in emerging markets to start with. So we were working with what we called next billion user markets. This was at the time where people expected the next billion people to come online for the first time. And so this is places like Brazil, India, Indonesia, et cetera. And so we built a startup program bringing in the top startups from these countries to partner with Google. Google was interested in, just building relationships with some of the rising sort of tech stars in these places, the CEOs, CTOs of some of the most promising growth stage startups in these markets. And so we built a program to really help accelerate them. We wanted, kind of in line with the startup mindset of give first, right? We wanted to build relationships with these kinds of companies and these sorts of change makers in a kind sort of give first manner. So we built a program to add value to them and their startup ecosystems as best we could. And the thesis going in was that this was going to be a place to accelerate their technology and their product and maybe marketing, et cetera. So it was really a technology-driven program, or so we thought. And what ended up happening is, now those things are still very important parts of the program. I want to be clear; it's a 6-month acceleration program that this program and this work is still alive inside Google today. But what we found was these founders, are often technical wizards. They've learned a lot. There's a lot of resources online to handle these hard skills, right? And so, give an example of talking with two 25-year-olds, CEO, CTO combo from India. They are, again, technically very advanced, but they've never managed anybody before. Now they have millions in venture capital funding, and they need to build a team of 100 people over the next, several months. It's overwhelming, right? And so they're like, yeah, I got these things, but is there anyone who can help me with the organizational dynamics, how to set up these teams the right way? How do I build the culture the right way? These are things I haven't dealt with before. And you think about in corporate America, in corporate life in general, I should say, management is earned over decades, right? You kind of earn your ability to prove yourself with a little bit, I've managed 5 people before. Now maybe I could manage 10. And you kind of earn your stripes over time. And even then, sometimes people fail, get put in spots where they can't manage it. And now you think about founders are oftentimes thrown into the deep end in a much extreme way, right? And so this is something that became very apparently a huge issue for these founders. So to that end, I was the lead program manager at the time for this program, and kind of hearing these sorts of queries coming in on a regular basis. So it became clear to me that we needed to help these founders in this domain. That got me to reach out to the people operations side of Google and try to seek out people with an interest and an expertise in this sort of domain. And that's when I connected with Martin. Martin's an organizational design expert inside Google. And so brought him in, and we kind of co-designed this program that we now call the Bonfire Moment. But what we ended up building a team of mentors and helped startups mentor on a one-to-one basis. But more importantly, we built what became a one-day sort of packed-in workshop that really helps hit on these people issues pretty comprehensively And it's been designed and refined, and feedback built in over several years, across hundreds of runs, reaching thousands of people, to kind of arrive at this workshop that we have today. And now, getting back to your question more directly, like did we write this book? We've been running this workshop in the Google for Startup Accelerator programs for years, like I mentioned. We get asked on a regular basis, "Hey, I want to bring this into my company. How do I do it? And do you have a book? Do you have scaled resources, et cetera?" At the time, we didn't, and we said, "I'm sorry, like we don't. We can share a few things with you." They then would kind of bootleg it and just do it on their own, anyways, inside their companies. And so the demand kept coming, and we kept getting feedback that startups were joining the program specifically to go through this one workshop. It's a 6-month program to get access to this one day. And so the word kind of spread, and the demand was there. And so Martin and I, dug into it a little bit more, and we decided a few years back to pursue a book. It was about 5 years ago. I remember we had a conversation in India. We were both, we're still, hopefully not too many gray hairs, but feeling a bit young at the time to write a book like this. And but now years have passed, and hopefully we were able to bring a lot of value to the world in this domain. And we're really excited about the book coming out, and what it can offer, and bring this sort of expertise and this methodology to a lot more people.
I've had the chance to work with some newer startups in India, and I'm curious if you find that in addition to the relationships being such a key component, that there's like a cultural thread that adds a dimension of complexity when you're thinking about the relationships and how they form, and some of the interconnectivity and barriers that you might face. And just curious if you had that experience too.
Yeah. Oh man, absolutely. I love that point. I love the cultural angles and the differences in the startup cultures across these markets. What I love about the Bonfire Moment is, now in part one of the book, we do talk about trends, and these are global trends that we think are good advice for a startup in any culture, in any market. But to your point, there are cultural nuances and things. What the Bonfire Moment is not a do XYZ per se. Now, in the part one, again, there is more specific guidance of recommendations, but the heart of the workshop is really bringing your team together, and it provides a framework to work through things together, where you are the experts in your business, you're the experts in yourself, and in your team dynamics, and you discuss these issues together. So we really create a process, what I hope should be considered a very trusted and battle-tested process, to help your team, regardless of culture, regardless of country, et cetera, because these differences are real, right? And a lot of what we are bringing in this workshop, things like self-assessments and 360 assessments and different sort of workflows, they've been in the corporate environment for some time, but startups often dismiss them because they're not, of startup culture. To go back to culture, and we've kind of taken some of these kind of tried and true kind of management tools and bent them towards startups, asking questions that are much more about startup leadership, things along these lines. So we're trying to bring what we believe are very vetted, proven things to the startup market. But it turns out that in our experimentation and doing this work, we've kind of battle tested these things within startup ecosystems, but found that they're very applicable beyond. It's not the first time that's sort of happened. Like the Lean Startup is a book that guides startups, but corporates that are trying to think like startups and things along these lines. There's lessons to be applied within nonprofits and corporate environments as well.
Yeah, could you share maybe an example of an adaptation that you've had to make from what is a big company, big corporate world into the startup market, and how you've made that shift for that audience?
Yeah, sure. So like we ask questions in the 360 assessment, really it's a self-assessment that people who go through this workshop have an opportunity, if they want to sort of go deeper and do it a 360 version. This is all on bonfiremoment.com if people are interested. But we ask things like much more about like scalability of self, things about agility, management agility, things about micromanagement and delegation. Some of this stuff sounds transferable, but especially things around delegation, effectively is something that we find is really important for startup executives. And we go just deeper into the wording and the nuance in some of these questions is kind of different there. And in addition, just something to mention, like this is not exactly what you're asking, but a little bit along the lines, like, we get asked sometimes who should participate in this sort of workshop. And with startups, it's really like the founding team and maybe the most senior leadership. But within like a corporate environment, we've run this within Google, inside, teams within Google as well that are not startups per se, but maybe entrepreneurs. We've done this with research teams, and it's really like the team lead and their direct reports. So you can kind of find it's really for any group taking on an ambitious endeavor, where there's going to be increased pressure and a need to align all groups to move towards something that everyone is marching towards and is, again, quite ambitious, where the pressure stacks up. It doesn't matter if that's inside a corporate or inside a startup or inside a nonprofit. We find that this applies pretty fluidly.
Josh, I would love for you to talk about, like, what are some of the sort of traps you see, or some of the things that you see when you come into an organization or when they start with you that are oh, this is a red flag. I know this is going to go sideways.
Yeah, awesome question. So actually, part 1 of the book talks about the 4 traps that we've seen. It's kind of trends that we've seen, right? So one, and some of these might seem obvious, but it's worth mentioning, right? So one is the trap of speed. This is going back especially to startups, but again, it applies elsewhere too. Yes, you need to be thinking of what's urgent and due today, but again, the statistic that's proven out in multiple studies is the majority of startups fail due to people issues. And those issues never feel like they're urgent, need to take care of today. It always feels like tomorrow's problem. And so the trap of speed is getting caught in the only managing the important and urgent things. But there's a whole section of very important, slightly less urgent things that if you don't make time for, they'll sink your startup and things. So the trap of speed is one that we make sure that people are aware of, that they're carving time out for, whether it's a day or a week or however you want to manage your time, but you are making time to understand, how am I falling into this trap of speed, and how am I balancing out longer term, really critical things around building a dream team, around team dynamics, around conflict resolution, things that might be sleeping beneath the surface that will ultimately probably wreck you, right? Second one is a trap that we call the inner circle, which is, we go into this quite a bit. It's a bit of a nuanced subject that we can go into more if we'd like, but it's that the inner circle often closes its ears and eyes to diverse opinions, and the criticality of inviting disagreement. And it's not just trying to get alignment and thinking you leave a meeting where everyone agreed, but maybe they actually didn't. Things along these lines. And so how to build an inner circle within your company that is durable to diverse opinions. And there's research study after study that shows the criticality of that, and how sometimes, a feeling of alignment might actually be a lack of inviting disagreement, and something people need to look out for.
Josh, can I ask you a question on inner circle real quick? So on one end of the spectrum, the risk is you have this tight inner circle founder, maybe, second in command, and you're just in a loop of reinforcing each other's ideas without even knowing it. Do you see that there's also maybe tipping that too far the other way in your experience, where you're just gathering too much feedback and the challenges that could create?
Yeah, so I run into that way less, but it is a risk, right? You almost always see it the other way. But yeah, it's something to be mindful of. Like if you get caught, you try to open up the doors too much, and every voice is heard. You need to at some point have use your discretion as a leader as what is an individual sort of complaint, just a differing of opinion, and what is actually pulling out the best ideas of your organization. So it's a bit of a judgment call, but I would err people on the side of caution to allow more voices in, because the trends are in that direction. So your point is really good, actually. It's something to look out for, but I would urge people to almost start to let the pendulum swing a little bit in that direction, and then look to correct back over versus, it's less likely that that's a problem today.
default to that direction, and that's a better place to be.
That's my recommendation. Yeah.
Mm.
And then another trap is what we call the maverick mindset. Now, especially in startups, right? People start startups because they are inherently driven to innovate, right? It's in their nature that they want to change the world in some way, bring a product to the market that will disrupt the way that the status quo, right? To disrupt the status quo. And what we mean by the trap of the maverick mindset is over applying that across things all over the company, right? And especially we argue management best practices. So, finding out where do we want to innovate, where do we want to disrupt, and where can we lean on best practices. And sometimes there is an inclination from these innovators, startup execs, co-founders, to say, yeah, we're going to bring this most innovative product to market. We're also going to have a completely innovative organizational structure. We're going to be a completely flat. There's going to be no managers. We're going to try this and that. And you ultimately kind of disregard what time has proven out to be best practices from a management perspective that do apply even into startups at certain stages. So it's kind of like, where can I lean on best practices and where can I pick my spots to innovate? And ideally, that's more in the product space and a little bit less in the management space. Now, not to say that all things will fail, and people have been very successful innovating in that space. And so we're not saying absolutely not. It's just a trap that people fall into, is over innovating in places where they could allow a more proven out, stable foundation organizationally. And that's something that we steer people away from if we can. And then
that makes sense. I mean, if you're
yeah.
pulling too many levers at once and you're tinkering with a bunch of different like management structure and communication style and your product and the space you're
Yes.
in, and you can't really tell what's working and or where challenges might be. Or
I was going to say, it
you're
sounds like
pushing
an
people.
awesome way to create mass chaos. Like there's no rules at all. Everybody just do whatever you want.
Yeah, that's it. It kind of can head in that direction, and so to kind of help the startup focus again. Like startups, it's all about focus. You need to be focused. If everything's moving in different directions, time is of the essence. We already talked about speed being paramount, and so that's just something we recommend. And then the last trap is we call the trap of confidence. And throughout a startup's journey, and again, this applies to being a team leader in a corporate or whatever it is, but when you're stepping into the unknown, maybe beyond what you're used to from a leadership or a visionary perspective, you'll waver oftentimes, sometimes being way overconfident, sometimes underconfident, feeling overwhelmed. And some people trend towards overconfidence throughout their journey. And what we found is that the best founders, our data has shown us that the best founders around the world kind of strike a balance, and they embody what we call confident humility. And it's kind of trying to straddle those worlds. You have to be a confident leader to instill confidence in the team. You need to be consistent, and you need to have confidence and faith in yourself. But you also need to know where your blind spots are. You need to know where your gaps are. You need to be able to invite feedback. We talked about inviting disagreement. You need to be comfortable enough to be able to field those kind of things. And so it's kind of balancing these two things out of being confident in yourself, but inviting mentorship or advice, advisors, whatever it might be at the right time. And so knowing where your limitations are. And we found, founders of multi-billion-dollar companies that, I think at first we thought would be, really embracing that overconfidence more. And we kept finding over and again that, we've had quotes like, no, we're a $1 billion startup at this point. We know we need help. So, it's like, okay, that's interesting to hear. And that's what we kind of found over and again is the executives, the founders of the most successful companies kind of knew where they needed help. And the less successful ones often had a bit of feeling where they consistently didn't.
Well, I imagine that it takes a level of humility to admit that you need help in order to get to the next level, right? If you're overly confident,
Yes.
you think you know everything and you don't need any help, then you're probably doomed from the start, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
I do want to go back to something that you said in the second trap around the inner circle, which is that you need to. It's critical to understand how to effectively disagree, and you talk about this in the book too. And I'd love to
Yes.
hear some of your advice around this because I think, especially in a startup environment, when you have a founder or founders who just see and believe so vehemently in what they're doing or in their path, and I think a lot of times they really have to learn how to disagree in a way that is beneficial for the team. And
Yes.
and disagreement is very important in an environment where you're trying to grow and achieve something. You have to have that, but I don't think most people are taught to do it very effectively. And I'd love for
Yes.
you to talk about how to do this well.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite parts of the book and one of my favorite kind of pieces of advice to share and to exactly your question. So um, we kind of talk about the two classes of disagreements. And oftentimes disagreements live in what we call class one, which is both sides don't quite understand the other side's perspective. And so you're kind of talking past each other, right? And this is oftentimes, why disagreement is not invited, because a lot of time is not taken to understand that it feels like this person doesn't have the context. I want to leave them out. Their opinions don't really matter because they don't. So you end up with a lot of people lacking context for one another's perspective, and then the disagreements. You're not. What chance do you stand to really communicate at that point? And so we call those, like strawman arguments, where you have like incomplete information, and you end up arguing on the basis of that. And what we encourage people to do, this would be leaders, but also people of all levels. This is just as individuals, it just, even in life, this is something that applies to relationships. It doesn't matter if it's the workplace or otherwise, but is what does it look like to have a class two disagreement where the other side can explain your side of the argument to you in a way that satisfies you? Can you tell their story or their perspective back to them in a way where they can shake their head and say, yes, you get where I'm coming from? And then only then can you then bring upon your points of disagreement. And then you're standing on firmer ground, right? And then you might simply disagree, but at least you're having an intelligent conversation where there's real communication happening, right? And so that's what we encourage, is inviting disagreement, but we call versus strawman having steelman arguments. So these should be on a foundation of steel rather than straw. Both sides be able to explain one another's perspective to each other in a comprehensive way, and then have the discussion only then. So obviously, sometimes business has to move faster and you have to make decisions. But when you're making very important decisions, and when there seems to be disagreement invited in about something that's critical, taking a moment to discuss things in this manner is the right approach.
Do you find that there's a mindset switch that's necessary to strawman steelman, like to actually welcome that? You almost like you put it, you can see when you do this with someone and they have a reaction and they immediately shut down or take the defensive position, versus the type of person that's like, yes, let's do that. That's an integral part of our process. Steelman for me. Do you find that that's important?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, I think you might have called it out. If you see someone shutting down, if you start to argue against somebody and you see them shut down, or if you feel tensions rising, is like you can just feel it in the room, whether it's literal and there's the volume or the tone changes. But if there's a tenseness or the opposite and there's a shutting down, it means someone's probably not being heard or feels unheard, or the argument has been abandoned due to feeling there's no point or something along these lines. And so what you want to be seeing is much more engagement. You want to see nodding. You want to see people aligning, and then maybe you get into a heated argument. But it should be, again, like, is the context coming in landing in a place of harmony, I guess is the way I would put it.
Yeah.
Do you ever give direction, Josh, on like how to end these things? I find that, I mean, I've built my own company and been involved in many others, and like I'll go to the mat all day, so to speak, with somebody in front of a whiteboard where we'll sort this out. I'm like, we are not leaving this room until we come to some type of agreement or figure it out. And my sort of rule in these scenarios is that I'll always say, like, we need to come to a next step by the end of this. Do you talk about that when you're having these sort of disagreement conversations? Like, is there a way to end it where everyone says, I feel seen and heard, and also like we have something to move on from, versus we just fought it out and then nothing happened?
Yeah. So like ideally you can reach consensus where the executive, whoever's CEO or whoever's leading the division or whatever it is in alignment with what the consensus was. And ideally the people who were on the other side of the consensus, if that's the case, if there's a minority sort of voice, again, you've kind of done this in the class 2 way where they were able to express themselves. So if someone's in disagreement, be like, is there anything left that you feel we're missing here? And you can welcome that in, but you do need to close it down. And so if you can build a culture where you have these sort of class 2 disagreements, then you should be able to set a precedent where, hey, look, we're going to get to a point where we're going to have to disagree and commit. What I can commit to you as the leader is that I will do my best to hear and understand the counterpoints before we proceed. But at some point, once everybody's been heard, I'll make a call and we'll need to go forward. And I aim for consensus. And in rare cases, I might have to act outside of that. But if you can build a culture where people can trust that you will hear them, and have these Steelman class 2 disagreements, when you make a hard call, people can respect that and follow through. That's what we found. Now, of course, is that going to happen every time? Maybe not, but that's the kind of culture you want to build. And to your point, yes, you need to close things out. So setting a goal for a meeting to close it out, let's open it up. Let's get a little messy, but by the end of this, I want to move forward. I want to come to decision. It's very normal. That makes a lot of sense. And you just do your best to design that day or that interaction in a way where voices can all be heard. I think I really value having everyone's ideas, the diverse ideas that might be in a room, even in a team dynamic that might be shaky, where people aren't getting along all that well. There's creative ways and creative things that you can do to get all the ideas into the shared pool of ideas where everybody feels I had my time. I was able to get my ideas across. Now, people disagreed with them. I didn't, win the argument per se, but I was heard. And that's what I think is the most important thing in those moments is people feel heard, and then you can move on. It's when you're not heard and you feel your idea was the better idea. And then if the chosen idea goes wrong, you just stuck, be like, they didn't listen to me. They should have listened to me, or whatever it is. And that is like a bit of a toxic seed that can be planted in teams, right? So you don't want that. You want to kind of avoid those.
I'd imagine if you've done a good job not falling into trap number 2 with inner circle, and you've created somewhat of a culture and a language in a smaller team where people feel like they can be heard. When you go into a workshop like that, you're somewhat set up for success. But I'd imagine if they're bringing you in, that's not always the case. And I'm curious, like, how do you set that up on the front end and get people in the right space to feel like that's the way they should engage?
Yeah. So we set like some principles in the workshop. First of all, like if we're going to go in, we have one-to-one conversations with each person, unless the workshop is scaled to a massive number where it's not possible. But ideally, we have one-to-one chats, and we kind of feel out going in with a little bit of visibility into what some underlying issues might be. So we don't go in totally blind if we're doing like a white glove style workshop, right? But we also set some ground rules that kind of make it a little bit easier. Startup culture is inherently braggadocious, right? And so people put on an air of, go back to confidence and just tend to lean into bragging and kind of, shout about, whether these are different companies all in one workshop or whatever, but, touting what university they're from or how many users they have or how much money they fundraise, and kind of almost trying to establish themselves within a pecking order or something. It's like, I'm, whatever in the room. So we say no bragging and no bullshit. This is not a place for that. You're not at your VC fetching your next round of capital. This is a place to get real. Everyone here is on equal footing. So, no bragging, no bullshit. We make it a very strong point that this is a time to invite diverse opinions. So within your team and within this room, and even us as facilitators, put your guard down and invite diverse perspectives. And so again, hopefully people can feel like, all right, for one day I can listen to things that I've tuned out in the past, right? And something that's important to us is a lot of this, these soft skills, if you will, the people skills and the people problems are often very intangible. Like it's like, yeah, there's an issue, but I can't pin down how to fix it. And then that prolongs it, because it's like, well, guess what I do know how to fix? Like, I know how to call that customer tomorrow and have that conversation. So I'm just going to check everything else off my list versus this very ambiguous, like, confusing problem that I have. And so, we want people to walk away making the intangible more tangible. So having this space to talk through these issues, drill down a little bit, taking this elephant in the room and bringing it down to size, and having something that you can walk away that might be quite concrete in how you can close the gap on something like that. And then lastly is just encouraging people to slow down. Like, again, almost everyone's probably in the trap of speed. Everyone's mind is running a mile a minute. For this day, we're going to slow down and help enable all those other three things to happen. And so we really set these ground rules and set the tone at the front end of the workshop. And then we go through the workshop in a way that builds on itself, and it helps people get to a place of openness and vulnerability. It's designed that way. So, you don't want to start the workshop and immediately jump into the deep end. It takes some time to get to a place where people that aren't so open can get to a more open position. So that's another thing that that's kind of baked into the design of the workshop.
Josh, I'm so glad you're talking about this, because I think this probably isn't talked about enough in the world of startups, in the sense that, sometimes people look at these challenges that come up in a business, a startup or not, and say, well, why haven't you dealt with this? Like, why haven't you resolved this? How did we get here? And to me, it always has seemed fairly obvious. I'm like, well, that's not what they're good at. They're really good at making the widget or building the code or selling the thing or whatever it is. Like, that's why they started this business. They like doing that thing. And you're right. Some of these other challenges can feel really ambiguous and esoteric, or maybe I just want to avoid them because I don't know how to have that conversation. I was never trained how to do that, but I'll spend my time over here, which is equally as hard, but I do at least know how to address this. Yes. What is the thing that you see in having so many of these conversations and being involved in so many of these organizations? What is the thing that you see that most often creates sort of that worse off compound interest? Like, is there a thing where if it starts happening or you see it, you're like, no, we're going to resolve this right now. This cannot wait.
Yeah, I'd say the number one thing is co-founder conflict. So there's a lot of people issues that can be percolating in a company at any given moment, whether it is interpersonal conflict, whether it is management questions, whether it is an inability to hire the right talent, whether it's you need to lay somebody off. That is a difficult conversation you don't want to have. There's so many things, but I don't think I put the statistic out there yet, but studies show 65% of startups fail due to people issues. And within that bucket, the number one sort of failure mode is co-founder conflict. So that's where it should start. And is there harmony, understanding? Is there clear ways of working across the co-founding team? Is the equity split in an equitable manner? It's not even equity split, but it's based on, energy put in, maybe position, et cetera. There's a lot of things that people do. They make error on as they build the company that sets the co-founding team up for failure, ends up causing co-founding conflict. And if you got arguments at the top, misalignment at the top, that's just going to break down the company as you go down the steps further down into the organization. So, that's the number one killer of startups is co-founder conflict. So that's what we look for first. That's really the heart of the first half, and maybe the entirety of the workshop is addressing that issue head on. Now, we do touch on broader organizational things and help improve individuals, which of course helps interpersonal dynamics. But we really took that co-founder conflict piece kind of head on, and kind of joke that it's a little bit like couples counseling for co-founders, right? And it's something that probably doesn't exist enough out there, right? It's like business partner conflict management. There's a lot of marriage counselors out there, but when it comes to the business side, it's a much less tapped into sort of need. And it over and over again, it's what sinks companies that who knows what they could have done had they been able to get that right.
Mm. Have you seen that startups, co-founders, or even maybe senior leadership who have come from larger organizations, maybe more accustomed to seeing some of these relationships washed out in the mass, and they're just not as used to how exposed interpersonal conflicts are in a startup world in a much smaller scale?
So to repeat your question, it's like asking like people coming from like a corporate environment, or do you
Yeah.
find that they get more exposed
They
in a
just don't
sense?
recognize that challenge will be as impactful in a
Yeah,
startup world.
it happens for sure. Like sometimes when you make some early hires, early senior hires, you bring in someone with a lot of corporate experience with some sort of, very important contacts, potential sales they could bring in with them or whatever it might be. There's potential culture clash for sure. And sometimes those people can adapt and sometimes they can't. And startups are inherently a little bit, like I guess you can say arguments can enter the open a little bit, and things like that don't often happen in the corporate environment where things are a little bit more controlled. There's a lot of reasons for why that dichotomy exists, but we've seen it work out well and work out poorly. But kind of we try to bring people back to the principles, either way.
Makes sense.
Josh, is there any advice you would give, whether it's partners or individual founder or otherwise? You get to come in as sort of sounds like in the middle, or even at the early stages, or when things are messy. Is there any advice that you would give before you're starting the business to help mitigate some of these things ahead of time? You can't solve for everything, and you can't resolve the people problems until you have them. But what can you do to prevent some of these things coming up?
Yeah, I'll name a couple. There is to plug the book a little bit. There's a list of 20 sort of questions that founders wish they'd asked themselves on day one, and you can kind of work through those within the book to kind of think about things that other folks wish that they would have. And so I won't go into all of them, but a couple things that kind of jump out in the part one of the book. One, when we talk about the inner circle, this is just like an interesting kind of fact that research shows is when you think about the inner circle and forming your co-founding team, sometimes you think you want to go where trust is highest, and like what's higher trust than family, but actually like family co-founded teams are not the best combination. And the reason for that, the studies show, and it's a bit of a theory, but is the stake of the relationships is so high, right? If something goes wrong within this partnership, if you have to fire your cousin, the implications within your family dynamic is complicated. And so you avoid having the harder conversations with family co-founding units to the point of your own company's demise. So can it work? Yes. We kind of call out examples in the book where husband and wife duos have built successful companies. So can people go against the odds and make it work? Yes. But the in general, the pattern shows and proves out that is not the winning combination. Like you kind of want to find the balance where you've found trust, but the relationship stake isn't as high as family per se. And like the most recommended kind of highest success rate is like people who used to work together. So people who have worked together in the past have seen each other's working styles, have a relationship, have developed trust, but you're able to have a hard conversation with that person, and you're not going to have to deal with them at Thanksgiving dinner if something goes wrong or something. Right? So that's just one little kind of tiny little piece of advice that's put in there. But other than that, there's a lot in the book that kind of goes through more detail.
So on the point of someone you've had experience with in the past, something that came to mind for me is even just having a common language that you can work from. Like there's trust, there's that deeper foundational stuff, but just productivity and being able to speak the same language and be on the same page and understand each other's tendencies.
Yeah, 100%. Like the second part of the workshop has everyone go through a user guide, and I think that's probably an understated aspect of that part of the workshop is creating shared language, to be honest. And it's a moment where everybody kind of thinks first about themselves. What's their, what motivates them to be at this startup? Is it the head, the heart, or the wallet? Like, I'm here for a combination of the three, or what? And everybody has different reasons for why they're there, and understanding that, and then having that shared language of knowing why someone's motivated, understanding how they handle conflict. And again, you do develop a shared understanding of the landscape across co-founders, but you also end up developing a shared, vocabulary as well. And that is a really good point. That is one that I don't really hit on all that much, but I think that's super valuable, to be honest.
Yeah, and then another balance to consider. If you're too comfortable with someone, then you might not be getting enough diversity of thought by bringing somebody in that doesn't challenge you, or you've gotten comfortable with them.
Absolutely, 100%. Yes, if you're only bringing in and holding tight to these tight relationships, the diversity of opinion, not only in the inner circle, but just outside of it, right? It's like you create this sort of insider club that people can't permeate and or penetrate rather. And so, yes, I totally agree. Like, thinking about, as we co-found, are we inviting diverse perspectives on day one is something everyone should be thinking about.
I mean, I think this is a real important long-term leadership strategy too, Josh. I mean, I think, we've many of us in the world of business have witnessed very successful leaders who sort of get their rock star posse, and nobody in there is going to give them the hard conversation or the hard news or say the hard thing. And you need that in order to see your gaps and in order to be successful.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll do a little plug. Like, oftentimes when the startup founders do our 360 assessment, it's the first time that they've gotten feedback like that. Again, most people who get 360 assessments on their leadership are like senior corporate leaders. Most 360 assessments out in the market are quite expensive, and they're only really marketed toward enterprise and things like that. People who are leading small to medium-sized startups and companies don't often get that feedback, where you can kind of reflect on yourself and then see how those around you, whether they report to you or they're your peers or your boss or your investors, how do they see you, and what do they see as gaps for you? And we bring that capability to the startup industry and just small companies in general, nonprofits, anyone who's kind of been lacking that. And yeah, it's an important moment where we've seen people get quite emotional, who have to look in the mirror truly for the first time and kind of see, okay, yeah, I've always seen myself this way, but in reality, I have a distorted view, right? And
Yeah.
And it really opens up and uncovers a lot of blind spots that, again, goes to making the intangible tangible. People can walk away with like, wow, this is what a gap between how I see myself and how others see me. And what do I got to do about that? And then you can actually bring that and talk to your team about that. I didn't know, and they're like, you didn't know? Sometimes it's like, dude, we all knew, but now it's finally being discussed. It's being, light is being shed onto this issue, right?
Well, we said it was important, not that it was going to feel good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you're a small team or a small organization, a startup, you likely don't have some forced function with HR or some of this big box kind of stuff that comes in play. So you have to seek it out. And even if it's not a budget constraint, you might be subconsciously, shying away from it. But there isn't this team of people who are saying, no, we're doing these things. You have to build it in.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. There's so rarely an HR muscle that's keeping like a heartbeat of an organization going. So you have to kind of raise your hand and volunteer for it. Also, in our workshops, it's kept very, privileged in a way, like meaning like the conversations are privileged within the team. We're not inviting, their investors, their customers. None of these folks are welcome into the room. So this is, the data is all very confidential. So within these sorts of assessments and the discussions, et cetera. So, to your point, some of the fears might be like, wow, I don't want like, my lead investor to see how poorly I'm managing or whatever it is. So these reports are really for the eyes of the participant and the co-founding team to share as they see fit, but it's a very private thing. And so we try to create it in a way where there is no HR system that's going to have the visibility to look over you. This is for you to do with as you see fit as a leader, and digest it and grow from it. It's about growth rather than, someone getting in trouble or having Big Brother watching over you or something like that.
What do you think about frequency for that? I know you guys you'll come in and implement this so it sets up your engagement for success. But for somebody listening and they're like, okay, maybe I should gather some feedback, but you don't want to beat feedback to death, and you don't want to go 2 years and have things build till they purge. So what do you think about frequency?
Yeah, I think it depends. Not to give a cop-out answer, it depends a little bit on the company and on how far away an individual is from being where they want to be, right? If you run, let's say, a 360 assessment and you have a lot of gaps and you're trying to address them quickly, and you're in a startup where you feel like you might be a failure point, you might want to ask those people to give you feedback again in like a quarter, right? Yeah. I would say, doing it a month later or something seems quite bizarre. But a traditional heartbeat cadence would be annual. Getting a pulse of where you're at on an annual basis would be kind of a default thing to fall into. That's what I've seen work pretty well. But in a startup, something fast moving with the manager, if you're a first time CEO and the team is growing quickly and you feel you need a more recurring pulse, like every 3 to 6 months for a minute, as you ramp up, might be something you should think about too.
Yeah, keep some steady questions if it's more frequent that will have continuity, but maybe mix it up a little bit based on where you guys are at.
Yeah, exactly.
Josh, I'm so excited for you. Like I'm so excited for people to get their hands on this book, because I think there's a lot of conversations around how to build a startup, how to scale a business, how to run a business, how to run these big corporations, be a better leader, but not as many conversations specifically around this, and specifically around some of these real tangible mistakes that people make that unravel companies that I don't think enough people talk about. So I'm really excited for people to get to read this, to get to learn from you. And I've enjoyed learning from you today. And we always ask, what's the one thing that you would want our listeners to take from this conversation? What's the one thing you want to leave them with?
Yeah, so much that we unpacked here today. And so I'm going to probably repeat one of the points that I'd already made a little bit. But I think I'll start with a broader point. 65% of startups fail due to people issues. Don't underestimate, the importance of the people side of your company in your race, to hit the market and to grow at a clip, that matches your investor expectations. What might end up killing you ultimately is the people side. So don't take that for granted. Always make time for it. That'd be my high level one thing to take away.
It's a good takeaway.
Yeah, it is. And if people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me at bonfiremoment.com. You can reach out to Martin and I there. You can learn about the book. You can learn about the workshop, and you can reach out to us for any inquiries or anything.
Thank you so much for being here today, Josh. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really awesome talking with you both.
All right.
We'll see everybody next time.